All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to start by saying thank you to Kelly and to Rachel and the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance team for the opportunity to present to you all wonderful people today. This is a very exciting topic for me and one that I hope is inspiring for the folks listening, and hopefully you can walk away today with some additional motivation, additional information about how we can approach smart water management and development in our beloved state, and a positive vision for a future where these types of strategies are more readily used and adopted in development practice. I'll give a little bit more background about myself. As mentioned, my name is Chandler Crouch, and I was born and raised out in Lake Travis. Spent my whole upbringing out there next to the Highland Lakes, and watched as they ebbed and flowed and went from nearly spilling over the Mansfield Dam Causeway about 7 feet from there a few times, as well as being all the way as low as 30%, 33%, as we've seen in the past over several records of drought here since 1994. Currently, they're about 44% if you are curious. But that left a big impact on me growing up and put a large emphasis in my mind about the importance of water in this area and how it provides for our families and our economies and our growth. And if we want to continue seeing those things flourish in our great state, we need to continue taking good care of those water resources. So I had that imprinted on me at a pretty early age, and that was able to kind of catapult me through getting my degree in civil engineering. After which I served in the U.S. Peace Corps. So I was actually stationed in Panama with a rural indigenous community where I worked on increasing access to potable drinking water through alternative water supplies. This community subsisted fully off of rainwater. They did not have a well or any kind of spring-fed system to rely on. And so that was really my first indoctrination, I'll call it, in alternative water systems, and something I was able to bring back to the States and connect with other practitioners and other engineers thinking about how we can adopt those types of practices into development in Texas as a way to increase resiliency in our water systems, as well as decrease sole reliance on our traditional water sources, those being surface water and groundwater. As we know, those are consistently under strain as we're dealing with rapid growth and increased frequencies of drought. So that's most of my background. I spent a few years as a municipal consultant working for clients like the major municipalities up and down the I-35 corridor, working on conveyance projects and treatment projects for them, and joined Texas Water Trade this last summer as an opportunity to get back into the service oriented field, and as a way to kind of approach from the user base of our water resources and work with our water user groups, and kind of get out in front of the growing supply needs, so that we could ease up on those on the investments needed to continue developing new supply. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like here through the rest of the slides. So the topic today is net zero water reuse, and that is as a one water strategy. And I'll talk about a little bit about both those concepts to kind of orientate us into space around those. And then, as Rachel said, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them with the time we have remaining after the slides. And you're more than welcome to reach out to me afterwards if we don't get to any of them. So let's see. So, oops. Texas Water Trade is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3 that was launched in 2019 to pioneer voluntary water transactions in Texas to advance ecological resilience and economic growth. We started doing this in the lower Colorado River Basin, developing water markets to purchase and lease existing water rights in the basin and deploy them to environmentally critical areas that are now lacking in natural freshwater inflows to counteract the saline intrusion from the bay. So we do that to promote the environment that is helping all the ecology and economies that operate in the bay that need those estuaries and those delicate balances of saltwater and freshwater in the bays. So that's how we started, but we decided that we could take this a step further and look for voluntary water transactions in other places as well. And we decided to approach our urban growth sector as well. And so this last year we launched our Net Zero Water program, which is solely focused on urban sprawl and development in the urban sector, to invite that development into the practice and into the room of and to discuss our water balance and participate in the water balance of our area. And so our goal is to view that development as a possible supply and a way to manage their demands rather than just being categorized as a demand to utilities and to our groundwater sources. So a little bit of a paradigm shift there, but it's an opportunity that we think there's an appetite for. We think and we believe, and we've seen evidence that a lot of developers in our area and a lot of utilities are looking for creative strategies to augment their demand profiles and provide additional resiliency in their supplies. And the on-site water systems I'm going to talk about in today's presentation are a great way to do that. There we go. So our agenda today, we'll talk about on-site reuse, which is the practice that Net Zero Water kind of operates under. Net zero being the ultimate conclusion, I like to say, of on-site reuse. But that's the category term that's most frequently used to describe these types of practices. We'll talk about where that fits into the One Water story. We'll then look at how we calculate and apply the benefits of on-site water. What are the actual values there? How much water can we offset? What are their potential ROIs? What are those categories? How do we define those? And how do we apply them? And then lastly, we'll look at impediments to adoption of this practice. What is it? If it's such a great idea, Chandler, then what's holding it back? Why isn't it being readily adopted? Why isn't it seen across every building? And every home, for example, right? Like what are those factors that are holding it back? So we'll walk through a few of those and then we'll wrap up. So to start us off, I like to talk about One Water, and I like to use this graphic as just one of many that can be found on the web about how One Water can function, and the opportunities we have for reusing and recirculating our water supplies back into our communities in a way that provides the most value for those supplies. And so we can look at this graphic and we can see that our water supplies traditionally start in the upper right side of the slide with our groundwater, our surface water, and our reservoirs being collected, treated, and distributed to our green spaces, our industrial spaces, our homes, and our commercial spaces, following those blue lines. And then the orange lines are representing the traditional collection method of centralized collection of that wastewater going to a centralized wastewater treatment plant, where that water is then treated and either discharged into rivers or streams. It can be land applied through irrigation of land application, and it can also be, depending on where you are, you can see some ocean discharge. But as we know, that's not the end of the story. One Water asks us to consider reviewing that source of water and considering it not the end of the story once it's been treated from its contaminated state, but potentially retreating it again through an advanced water treatment system and then redeploying that water back into our communities. So we can do that by treating our wastewater effluent up to a higher water quality standard and using it for groundwater augmentation, like a aquifer recovery, an ASR system. We could use it for surface water augmentation. That's called IPR. That's where we discharge treated effluent into an environmental buffer, shown as that reservoir by that purple line on the left side of the page. And then that water is then treated again by the drinking water treatment plant. We could treat that effluent all the way back up to drinking water quality standards directly and redistribute it right back into our drinking water system. That's called direct potable reuse. So that's an option as well. And then we could also treat that water to water quality standards defined under Chapter 210 of the TCEQ code, which is called Type 1 effluent. And we could redistribute that through a purple pipe system or a centralized reclaim system, as it's often called, and use that water for green space irrigation for all of our public spaces, athletic fields, you name it. We can also deploy that same water, that type 1 effluent, for other reuse opportunities. We could send it to industrial users who could use it for mining. They could use it for dust suppression. We could send it to even our domestic users. They could use it for outdoor irrigation needs and refrain from using potable drinking water. We could send it to our commercial users as well, our commercial sector, who could use this water for non-potable demands at their sites like fire suppression or indoor toilet flushing, cooling tower makeup water, irrigation as well. So there's lots of opportunities to get more drop per drop out of our water when we start to consider the ways that we can circulate it back through. And then lastly, we've got this over on the far left side of the page, we've got these buildings that have all four of those arrows circulating around them, labeled as sustainable development. And what that's indicating is that our urban space, our development space, has the opportunity to participate in these systems just as much as the centralized utilities do. These buildings have the opportunity to supply some of their own water and offset some of their own potable demands by capturing, storing, treating, and reusing water within their project footprint, within their site footprint. And these systems can really integrate together. They don't need to operate in silos as we develop our one water strategies and, for example, are using that type 1 effluent, the reclaimed water that I was discussing earlier. If a building's already dual plumbed and ready to accept that water for their non-potable demands, they've already separated their potable drinking water demands from their non-drinking water demands. They're readily acceptable to bringing online or connecting into a reclaimed line. And so these types of sustainable developments can integrate very well into the objectives and one water programming of an area, of a utility over an area. So we'll look at a few examples of what that looks like here in the next couple slides. So to define net zero water, this is a design approach. This is a design mindset for a building or for a site where they're going to prioritize use of alternative water sources other than the utility drinking water or groundwater wells to meet as many of their on-site demands as they can. The traditional supplies of on-site water that could be used for this type of strategy are shown here on the slide. They can be black water, which is the lowest water quality. We'll talk about water quality here in a few, but you've got black water, gray water, evaporative cooling blowdown, foundation drainage water, and then the more readily known stormwater, rainwater, and AC condensate. All of these are supplies that could be captured on site, treated, and reused. And we have research, we have evidence of systems like this in practice in the field at buildings that are operational and using these systems to offset their potable demands. So they're minimizing, they're still connected to a drinking water line from a city, but they're using these sources, these on-site sources, for all of their non-drinking water needs. And by doing this, they've been able to reduce their demands compared to a typical building if they were just using the drinking water line by up to 70%. So they've had a over 50% reduction in their drinking water requirements. So these strategies can provide substantial water offsets, not just at a single site, but when applied, in mass, you could see a large reduction in GPCD, which is gallons per capita per day. That's the amount of water used per person at a site, which is calculated by assuming all water is used by drinking water. All demands are drinking water. This can really start to reduce those factors and alleviate the stress on the drinking water supplies of our cities and of our towns. And when we consider net zero, this term is most frequently used from the power industry, right? We recognize it from implementing solar energy and saying, okay, this building's going to use, it's going to be net zero, so it's not going to use any grid electricity, right? It's going to be fully self-sustaining. And while that is a great aspiration for the application of water, we recognize that that's not always feasible based on building typology, based on occupancy. And so while netting out is a goal and something we'd love to see, it's not a requirement for these strategies to be beneficial and to be of use and to provide really high volume offsets at the building. So we don't let people get scared off if they say, oh, well, if my building's not fully self-sustaining, then I haven't done one water, I haven't done net zero. You say, no, you're still providing a benefit. This is just giving us a goal to trend towards, something to aim towards, right? And so we'll see some examples here in a few. So the next one we're going to look at is on this next slide will be a building that's schematic that's using one of these systems, and I'll show how well this building is able to provide its own water, but also integrate with the one water strategies of the city that it's in, as I mentioned previously. So this is the Credit Human building in San Antonio. This building has been online for a couple of years now, and they're pulling data out. They just actually won a Blue Legacy Award from the Texas Water Foundation this year, which was awarded to them at a conference this spring in Austin. This building design separates out its drinking water, its potable drinking water, and non-potable water demands on site. So they have two different water supply lines in the building depending on the end use of that fixture. If it's a hand sink or a water fountain or an ice maker or a shower, anything like that, it's using drinking water. If it's toilet flushing, or if it's outdoor irrigation, or if it's cooling tower makeup water, in this instance at this building, it's using a non-drinking water supply line. And what this allows them to do is integrate a collection system at the facility that captures rainwater off the roof and all of the AC condensate coming off of their air handlers. And they store that water in 130,000 gallons of on-site storage, which are shown by those the blue barrel-shaped symbols there on the right side of the slide. And they store that water, and then they have a day tank, which is shown inside of the parking garage structure there at the bottom of the slide. But basically, they bring that water in, they treat only the amount they need as they need it. They treat it with microfiltration and UV disinfection to bring it up to a safe human contact standard, not for drinking, but minimizing the amount of pathogens in the water by UV disinfection and filtration. Then they redistribute that water following those purple lines back up into the building to their indoor toilet fixtures, to their outdoor irrigation, and to their cooling tower. And so this system's very neat. This is a pretty high quality one. It's using conjunctive use, so it's using two different on-site water sources, the AC condensate, which is being produced most of the summer, right, as we ramp up our AC demands. And then it's able to capture the rainwater, which most typically we see in the spring and the fall, and not so much in the summer. So by using both those sources, they're able to get a higher average supply across the year. And then the neat part about this building is, as I mentioned, it integrates with the One Water objectives of San Antonio, where this building's located. The city of San Antonio has a centralized wastewater treatment facility where they use gravity to pull all the wastewater to a single site. They treat it, and then they treat it to type 1 effluent standards. So they retreat it again to a better quality, not to drinking water quality, but to human contact quality, following the TCEQ regulations. And then they redistribute that through a second distribution main back into the city of San Antonio. And so since that distribution main was adjacently located to this building as they designed it, they decided to use that as their backup supply of non-potable water. So in the event that the AC condensate or the rainwater isn't available, say it hasn't rained and their AC system broke, or whatever the scenario is, for example, maybe their system's down for maintenance, however it is, they still have a reliable supply that's not reverting back to drinking water. They're able to use the SAWS reclaimed water main as their backup supply. So this is showing that as the city invests in developing infrastructure that can supply non-potable water for non-potable demands, these buildings are incentivized to design that into their site because it's a source that is not putting a strain on the drinking water supplies, and they're using it for demands that don't need drinking water, right? So there's double benefits there. So this is a great example of how a building can be partially self-reliant, supply some of its own water, and have a backup source that's still not just drinking water in the event that their on-site system goes down. So really cool example there. They have estimated water savings of 1.25 million gallons annually. So a pretty substantial amount for their site. And you can also see that as more of these are to come online, you're going to see greater and greater impact and greater reduction of potable demands along this area, right? So we'll look at one other example, which I imagine lots of folks have heard about at this time. A good institutional example I like to bring up is the Blue Hole Primary School out in Wimberley. This is a system that also captures rainwater and AC condensate. It uses that microfiltration and UV disinfection, a similar system to the previous example, to treat that water, and then they use it for subsurface drip irrigation at their athletic field. When they designed it, they expected annual potable water savings projected at 90%, which is just a huge reduction. And what that tells you is that a lot of the water that these buildings are using are non-drinking water in nature. They're going to outdoor irrigation. They're going to water-cooled HVAC. They're not going to hand sinks, food prep, and showers. That's in this example at this school where you have minimal bathroom usage, unlike a house or a high rise, right? You've only see 10% of that water that needs to be drinking water quality. So some substantial offsets. In their first year, they were able to save 500,000 gallons, which is just 49% of a comparable school based on the number of students and the square footage. Their projected 30-year cost savings is $750,000. So this system will absolutely pay itself off in the lifetime of the school. And they also have the school has the benefit of knowing that they're going to own and operate this system for the lifespan of that 30 years, right? And so there's the opportunity to amortize that cost out across 30 years where that payback is coming incrementally. They're not trying to get that payback just in water usage savings in a short span. So they have the benefit of being an owner of a facility, an operator of a facility that's going to be in space and using this system for a long time. And that's where I've seen the best bang for our buck and the most integration of these types of projects are at sites and at buildings and campuses that are planning to be there for a long time. They're not so much at projects that are going to turn over hands or be sold in 2 to 5 years. We're seeing these systems more often than not come online at schools and sites that institutions, for example, universities, sites that are going to be churches is another example where I'm seeing these places that the owners and developers of the building plan to be there for a long time and plan to integrate with that community and understand the water challenges of Texas and especially Central Texas. So that's kind of a high to low, hopefully somewhat detailed for you about where this practice of on-site water fits into the One Water story that I know is becoming popularized. A lot of utilities are taking One Water initiatives. So that's kind of where it sites. It integrates. It's not operating in a silo. It's not counterproductive. It integrates with the One Water efforts of a whole area. And so now we'll look a little further about how we go about calculating the benefits and understanding the benefits of these systems. And how we go about designing them and selecting them as they go into projects. So when we start to look at these types of projects, we start with looking at kind of a theoretical supply and demand curve for a project, right? So say a project wants to come online and they'll sum up all of their fixtures and all of their anticipated demands at the site, water demands that is at the site, and they can sum them up across a year by month. And I've got that shown on this slide in the bars. And so you can see we've broken out all of the different types of water demands in those bars on this chart based on the type of demand. Is it potable? Is it drinking water? Is it hand sinks and water fountains? Is it cooling demands? Is it going to the HVAC? Is it outdoor irrigation demands? Is it indoor non-potable demands like perhaps indoor toilet flushing or process water at a manufacturing facility? And then once we have all of our anticipated demands through the year, we can start to build theoretical supplies and see how they stack up against our projected demands. So we look at all of those supply option of on-site water supplies, which I mentioned at the top of the slides, the gray water, black water, AC condensate, storm water, rainwater, perhaps foundation drainage water, depending on where we're located. And we use the data from the sites, such as square footage, such as precipitation data from an area, HVAC tonnage, and we can build a theoretical supply curve across a given year, an average year, or even a drought year. We can factor in drought for this. And you can see in this example, those are delineated by all those different colored lines across the chart, across the year. You can see that in this example, no single on-site water supply by those lines indicated by the lines is higher or could fully meet all of our demands, right? So we instantly know, okay, we can't just use one supply for everything. We don't have enough. So what if we worked conjunctively? What if we started combining these two supplies or three supplies potentially? Where would that land us? And then what would that be able to alleviate? Which demands represented by those different colored bars would we theoretically be able to net out or fully move off of drinking water and onto an on-site water supply? So we look at these lines, we look at these curves, and we say, okay, we can see our rainwater, which is that yellow line, right? It's kind of got some seasonal flow to it. And so does the AC condensate, which is that orange line, right? That's got a real large build into the summer when we're running our air conditionings at full bore. And so we say, okay, well, if we start capturing that, and then maybe we capture another supply with it, where does that land us? And so we start to kind of do a water balance analysis to figure out what the best bang for your buck is, where you're not adding so much cost and complexity to a project that it becomes infeasible economically, but that's providing enough volumetric offset and payback that it's worth doing, right? So there's a balance. And a lot of this will come down to what the building typology looks like. Is this a high-rise, multi-use with apartments and office spaces that has a very small roof footprint, so you can't catch as much rainwater, but they've got laundry facilities, for example, on every single floor producing a lot of gray water, which coincidentally may all be stacked right on top of each other and very easy to collect in a centralized single stack drain line. Well, there's an easy to catch low cost change that we could add to the project, which would allow us to pull off all that gray water and potentially use that for something else. Other example could be a single story site with a lot of square footage. Think maybe a box store like our Target, our Walmart, where it's one large roof, tilt wall concrete, and maybe 100,000 some odd square feet. Well, that's a ton of potential rainwater capture and if you have adequate storage for that on site, and many of these sites have enough acreage to be able to fit that kind of storage, maybe that might be the only supply you would need to meet all those indoor flushing needs, for example, or a substantial amount of your outdoor irrigation needs. And so this is a kind of a subjective process that is worked through with your designer, your engineer, your owner's rep to figure out what's going to be the right curve, the right nexus between cost and payback and water offset. And so that's kind of the practice that we go through when we're starting to think about applying these projects. The next thing we want to think about when we're choosing the right sources is health and safety, right? First and foremost, we want to protect public health. I like to start by looking for on-site water sources, beginning with the highest water quality and moving downward as needed. So we start by looking at our source water quality tier list, which I've got here shown. Highest quality water is going to be coming straight from our utility. That's going to be our drinking water. The next highest quality and trending downwards is going to be our condensate recovery from our air conditioning coils, because that's effectively distilled water out of the atmosphere. Rainwater, evaporative cooling, foundation drainage, if we have that. Not too often here in Texas, but it's worth mentioning. Stormwater, gray water, and then finally at the lowest water quality, black water. And so, a lot of these projects can have a lot of success in offsetting substantial amounts of their water working from top down and starting with the easiest to manage, easiest to capture, store, and treat and reuse, the most cost effective. And so that starts with the highest water quality and working downward. There's additional costs, complexity, and regulation as we move down the water quality hierarchy, especially once we get down to black water. Those are the most complex and the most challenging to get permitted, installed, and operated. And so if you're going to move in a direction like that, you're hoping to see substantial offsets. You're hoping to see meeting all potentially of your water demands through using that source. So those are not the most applied. I would say you start with the highest water quality and work your way down and see where we start adding those together, those conjunctive supplies can get us to and what we can start to offset. So health and safety, source water quality, and then the costs to capture, store, and treat. Those are the next items we think about when we're working on these projects. I mentioned treatment, and I wanted to give a few examples to show the range between these types of systems. So I've got 2 example treatment chains here shown on this slide. And while they may look fairly similar, they have maybe some overlapping components. There's significant cost and complexity between the 2. For example, on our top example, we see AC condensate and rainwater harvesting and use for spray irrigation. So in a system like this, we may have a first flush diverter, a storage cistern, a cartridge filter for filtration. We then might use a UV disinfection. And then that water is effectively a high enough quality for outdoor use, where it's going to have minimal contact to the public. If we move, as I mentioned, down to black water, we've got an additional item there, which is just shown as one of those squares called membrane bioreactor, which is just one of many available options to be able to treat black water at a small scale on site, but which add significant complexity and permitting requirements through the TCEQ. Whereas if you're staying in the higher quality waters, there's far less requirements. Not saying that is an excuse for putting the public at risk. I will always still advocate for high water quality standards and testing. We'll talk a little about how some of those impediments or lack of requirement for AC condensate and rainwater, I believe, is an impediment. But black water systems require a licensed operator in the state by TCQ to manage, and so there's additional cost and complexity there to those systems. So if you're going to move in that direction, you're really hoping to see significant offsets. But in that example, you'd see pre-screening, you'd see a biological treatment, you'd see UV disinfection, you'd see then possibly chlorine injection, and then that water can then be reused for non-potable demands at a site. And then lastly, as we're thinking about these systems, we also want to think about reliability, especially with those seasonal supplies. As I mentioned, the rainwater and the AC condensate being kind of the lowest hanging fruit, also the ones that are really dependent on the season and the occupancy and use of the building. And so when we look at those 2 supplies, we want to make sure that we are sizing our on-site storage appropriately to minimize costs but maximize the reliability of these sources. And so we can actually build a curve using reliability models based on factors like precipitation data for your area, historic data, catchment area, and your average daily demands, your projected demands that you want to try to use these systems to meet, and we can build a curve. And there's often, as shown in this line, you can see there's a break-even point, right? Where all of a sudden adding additional storage, which is shown on the bottom of the chart there, isn't netting you all that much more reliability shown on the vertical axis. So you want to kind of find that sweet spot. Whereas in this example, I think this was this was a single site that has 70,000 square feet of capture area for a rainwater harvesting and AC condensate recovery system. And the break-even point for them was right at 110,000 gallons of storage, which would net them an 89% reliability. And that doesn't mean that 89% of the year it's reliable. That means that for given demands in these theoretical supplies, any given year has an 89% chance of likelihood that the on-site storage and supply will fully meet those demands, right? So that's I would argue fairly high reliability. We could squeeze it all the way up to 94, 95, 96, but you can see our storage volume is doubling. It's going out to 190,000, 210,000 gallons of on-site storage, which just breaks down the economics behind these systems and makes them really not feasible for perhaps for the site constraints being just storage footprint. Where do you store all that water, as well as the cost? So we want to make sure that we're fine-tuning these designs, that they've got the right amount of storage. We're providing strong reliability, but not oversizing or undersizing, so that the system's not able to provide what we need, what we're designing it for. And so here we go into our last section. I think this is one of the most important ones for the practice of on-site water and reuse and the net zero design approach that we've been talking about. And this is impediments to that. We've all heard of these ideas. We know rainwater harvesting's a generally good idea. We know it's been proven academically to be reliable. We have studies coming out of the Meadows Center at Texas State showing that there's firm yields that can be provided by these supplies, and we know that they can offset valuable potable drinking water, so that we can allow for more growth without totally over consuming and overstraining our traditional supplies and running our aquifers and our surface water reservoirs to the dry limit. But why aren't these types of systems being more readily used? What's holding them back if they're that good of an idea, if they're proven to be reliable? I think I'll walk through a few of these impediments. One of them, I argue, is system design expertise. These systems, while they are not overly complex, they do have enough complexity that they can't be left poorly designed and expecting a contractor to install them appropriately. Oftentimes, you could see on a schematic for a building, you've got a site map and you've got a building footprint, and somebody just draws a circle for a rainwater tank and says, hey, put a rainwater tank here. They draw a line to the corner of the building and they say, connect to the gutter. But if they don't provide a high-end detail, how they want that connection to be structured, what kind of additions do they want a first flush? Do they want an overflow? Where do they want their discharge lines coming from? What kind of pad? What do they want that tank to sit on? Is it sitting on gravel? Is it sitting on concrete? What kind of tank is it? If you just leave, if those things aren't included in the design, you're not going to get a high quality project, and the system's not going to work the way that it was intended to do. So we can do all the front end work and design and show them the reliability, show them the payback based on this amount of storage and this amount of use. But if it doesn't get installed the right way, it's not doing anybody any good, and we're just spinning our wheels. So you've got enough complexity that these systems do need some oversight in design. And then you've also got constraints and challenges that these types of projects, these types of systems impact multiple components of a project. When projects are pulled together in design sheets, you've got general disciplines that are separated through the design package. You've got site work, which is like grading and the water line connection to your centralized utility, parking lot design. Then you've got the building, the mechanical and plumbing and electrical design that goes into the building. You've got landscape design sheets, which are handled by a landscape architect or engineer. So you've got this wide bank of expertise, and these projects can touch all of those sheets, right? If you're showing a reservoir or a storage cistern on one sheet, you better make sure it shows up on those others and that it plays nice with the other components in the project, especially if you're trying to bring water from outside the building inside the building. These two, these two design specialists need to be able to work in conjunction and work in complement to each other to understand how these systems are going to operate. So if one engineer on one component of the project is well versed and designed something is to the best of their ability, a different design engineer who works inside the building, like the plumbing engineer, he doesn't know, they may not know what to do with that pipe, right? Or where it's supposed to go, or how it should be best routed or best integrated with the rest of the system. And so you've got these constraints between the specialty discipline overlap because these components to these projects have enough complexity and enough integration demands across the whole project that you really need somebody who can talk to all of those different specialties, right? And can make sure that these projects go in well. And that's that design package coordination. And then lastly, we don't yet have a very large vendor pool for both design, construction, and operations, which I'll talk about on the next slide, for these systems. Once they go in, it oftentimes can fall to the building staff. Perhaps your front desk admin is now being asked to go check on the rainwater harvesting system. And maybe there's a break in it or something occurs, a filter gets clogged, which could be a very easy fix, but to that person is trying to learn Japanese, and they'd say, okay, well, let's just bypass this thing. Let's just turn it off. I don't know how to fix it. And all of a sudden, all that hard work and design, all that hard work and construction is now just going to waste because the on-site staff doesn't have strong integration with how to operate these systems. So we've got limitations there to the design, the install, and the operations. So big impediment there. These systems are not set and forget it. That's what I was alluding to in the last slide. They do require ongoing operations and maintenance. Anybody that is listening who has a rainwater harvesting system knows, hey, after the spring and fall tree leaf drop, I've got to go out there and scrape the leaves off my gutter, scrape the leaves out of my catch filter at the top of my tank, and make sure that I'm still getting flow into the system and out of the system, right? And so it does take some O&M to make sure that that's occurring and make sure these systems are operating correctly. I showed you UV filtration, on those last ones, like somebody's got to be able to change that bulb, right? That UV light bulb has a life expectancy, maybe 50,000 hours, but it eventually will burn out. And if no one replaces it, then the system's not working as it was designed. So we've got to make sure that we're educated on how to operate and best maintain these systems. And so, in part of that, we need training and accreditation. We need a credential for operating these systems. And so the city of Austin, their Austin Water Utility, is actually in the process of working with a national organization called the Blue Ribbon Commission to develop a training manual and test to get a credential. It's a certification, not a license, to be able to operate these systems, to understand, okay, what's that full range of those on-site sources that I mentioned up to Blackwater, right? Because we know that has to be operated by a licensed operator, but everything underneath that, how do we go about maintaining those systems? And so we're hoping that we can generate a market, create a market of interest. As more of these systems come online, more operators will want to get trained and get paid to go and service these systems. So that's something that we're working towards, that overlaps a lot with workforce development, which I know is impacting a lot of different fields, especially the water and wastewater sector. So we're hoping to see good things out of that, and that way these systems can fully function the way that we designed and get them installed to do. Additionally, we've got financing impediments. These systems, while they're not, they may only represent a few % of a total project budget. They're costly enough that they can often get value engineered out. They can get designed out of the project since they're an additional cost. And there's not yet great vehicles to finance these at low interest with low interest loans. Other water projects developed by utilities and cities, since they're backstopped by ratepayers who are purchasing the drinking water, those rates are used to pay for the capital, to service the capital, to build additional infrastructure, to grow our traditional water supplies. These on-site water systems, they don't have a payback mechanism like that. Once they're online and they're being benefited, right? They're providing a benefit to a building. The only financial savings you're immediately seeing is the savings from your water bill, right? And so yes, you're saving water and you're saving on your water bill, but that financial saving, that economic savings there, that might take 30 years to be able to pay back $100,000 for the cost of this on-site water system. So we're still looking to find and identify more ways to unlock low interest financing so that the purveyors of these projects, they don't have to shoulder that capital burden alone. They can get a low interest loan that allows that savings, that water savings, to service the debt that pays for the system, just like at a centralized level. Texas Water Trade worked with another nonprofit, the National Wildlife Federation, to publish a report on utilizing PACE, the Texas PACE Authority, who provides loans for retrofits, for energy and water efficiency retrofits. So that's an option. This has not historically been used for water. It's mostly been used for energy. And when used for water, it's been used to swap out fixtures, going to low flow toilets, low flow hand sinks, and shower fixtures. But there's opportunities to use this for these types of projects and types of systems that we've discussed today. And we're constantly looking for folks that are willing to take that on. Austin Water does have incentives, cash incentives and permitting incentives to projects that do this. They'll expedite permitting. They'll reduce connection fees to the utility line. So there's other ways to incentivize these types of projects to come online that aren't just cash exchange. They could be other benefits to a project like speed, which is really important for a lot of projects coming online. I mentioned permitting earlier. Permitting is certainly a challenge on the Blackwater systems. Other than those, the TCEQ, who regulates water systems in our state, they don't have minimum requirements for testing for rainwater harvesting and graywater harvesting systems. And so that can make a lot of utilities shy away from accepting these app projects within their network, within their service area, for the perceived risk of public health. And so what we'd like to see is more standardized requirements for these systems in terms of treatment and testing, so that we know they're adhering to a high quality and high standard to protect public health. The National Blue Ribbon Commission, which I mentioned earlier, is a great resource who have come up with some standard guidebooks for helping cities and utilities develop these threshold criteria, these design criteria for these projects to follow, to make sure that they're adhering to a high quality standard and protecting public health. So we'd like to see more utilities and cities adopting those standards to incentivize these projects and give them bounds to make sure that these systems aren't just operating out in no man's land and potentially contaminating or endangering public health. But yeah, lots of consideration for permitting there. This is just like a little tree showing all the pathways you might get on. And I recognize I'm absorbing a lot of time, so I'll run through these last couple of slides here. Regulatory opportunities. If you're interested, check out SB 1289. That just came online 2023. That unlocks sewer mining, where a site can pull water out of the gravity system, the centralized city system, treat it on site, and reuse it for outdoor irrigation. And then there's also opportunities for rainwater systems to become public water supply systems. This applies out in rural areas you don't have a utility to provide water to your site, and you don't want to use groundwater. There's opportunities to use rainwater, and there's only currently one permitted public water supply system that solely uses rainwater, and it's in West Austin at Shield Ranch. So if you're interested, check that out. Lastly, certifications. We'd like to see more of these. There is a few out there like LEED. LEED has just launched in 2020 a net zero water or a net zero initiative. They have net zero energy, net zero carbon, and now net zero water, where they look at a water balance of a site and they determine if you are using more alternative water, so more of all the on-site supplies we talked about, or even the municipal reclaimed water, more water other than drinking water, they'll call you net zero. So you don't actually have to zero out or net out where you're not using any drinking water, but as long as you're using more of another source than the drinking water source, they're willing to call that net zero. So that's an interesting certification that's come online here recently that buildings can apply for. And so far, I've really only seen this utilized at developments that are already going to be pursuing other LEED goals, LEED certifications. But opportunities there, and we'd like to see more of that. So in close, talked all about on-site water, what it looks like, how it can be thought about and implemented, and what's holding it back. We know it's an important component to the One Water approach. We know it can provide substantial volumetric offsets when reliably designed well and installed and maintained well. And we know that there's impediments continuing to hold it back that we walked through here on this last section. Water Trade last year rolled all this information up, so a lot of those graphics you've seen can be seen here in this on this resource. This is a public document available on our website or at this QR code, or reach out to me and I'll get you the web link to it. It takes an even deeper dive than what we've gone through today into these systems. Similar approach of what they are, how they can be implemented, how they can be financed, how they can be permitted, operated, and maintained. And takes a full breadth of knowledge and deep dive into that. That was sponsored by a few entities, Austin Water, Aquacel, and LCRA. So we're really happy with how that turned out. Please do check it out. It's fairly graphical in nature, so it's dense, but it's absorbable. And then lastly, my role as the net zero water engineer is to just lower barriers of entry for these projects. So I can help in technical support for decision makers. I can help in analyzing what best options and recommendations are for these types of projects. I can help with pricing estimates and permitting analysis, and I can provide treatment and monitoring recommendations. And I provide that whole suite of options to try to just get more of these systems online in hopes that as more of these on-site water systems come online, the benefits are realized and the market adoption replicates. That's really our target goal with this program at Texas Water Trade. So with that, that's the end of the slide deck. Just a few more minutes before 4:30. Apologies. Happy to take any questions, and again, reach out to me if we can't get to it now. Thanks.
No, thank you so much, Chandler. That was a really interesting talk and really useful. If it's okay with you, I may hold us over until 4:40 if you're able to stay on that long to answer some of these questions. If you need to jump, that's okay. Let me know. Folks, don't feel like you have to stay on, especially if you're not anticipating the Q&A session. Chandler, if it's okay with you, I know I'm not going to get to every question. Would you mind sharing your email in the chat for those folks who we don't get to today, and they could reach out and ask you their question? Is that something you're able to do?
Good thing. Okay. You guys have been able to see my slides, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I all of a sudden couldn't see them on my side, and I said,
Oh, no, they've been great.
Great.
So
Okay.
while you do that, I'm going to go back to the first slide for our first question, and then I'll try to do the questions in order of the slides as you presented them. So Deborah Young asks, going back to the first slide, if there's any discharge into the rivers, what does that look like? And what are the phosphorus and nitrogen levels?
Yeah, absolutely. So the TCEQ regulates a direct discharge of any wastewater in our state. So that's anything over 5,000 gallons per day, which could be handled by septic. So these are all centralized, large-scale treatment facilities. And the permits and the requirements for nitrogen and phosphorus are set by the TCEQ on an per case basis. So they look at all the data of the river or the stream that you're going to be discharging into, and they set your permit limits for those nutrients based on protection of the environment, of the downstream environment in that stream. And so we are seeing more and more stringent limits come out as new permits are applied for, new wastewater treatment facilities are installed, and we do expect to see phosphorus limits become greater and greater. That's definitely top of mind for the TCQ is those nutrient limits.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I think the next question in order of the presentation was asking about how a lot of these that we talked about and that are in the Net Zero Toolkit are kind of a site-by-site reuse. Does Texas Water Trade do any net zero on more of a development scale when you combine on-site reuse with rainwater harvesting and other strategies? Or is y'all's work more focused on that building by building?
Do you mean in terms of like a multifamily or a residential kind of development, like more than just one
Yeah, I think
building?
like a residential development.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that detached single family homes are probably the toughest nut to crack for these types of systems, because housing affordability is such a critical factor that currently there's challenges in getting additional costs added to those projects to maintain affordability. I have seen new technologies coming online that by vendors who are partnering with residential builders to install kind of at mass to all new homes at a development. Systems like gray water harvesting that pull all of the laundry machine or utility room connection out and use that for front yard or backyard irrigation. And so those are being installed at scale at all 600 homes or 1,000 homes that a developer is planning for and expecting the builders to utilize. So there's opportunities like that. And then I've also seen in the Hill Country, there are a few smaller residential communities that were installed where the charter and the deed is requiring the homeowner to use rainwater. So they actually have minimum rainwater storage requirements in the deed. So if the builder's going to build there, they've got to include that in the price of the home. So those two examples of it at the residential scale, but I would say at the campus and large building scale, that's where currently we're seeing the most adoption.
Perfect. That's a sweet spot right now. Thank you. And then we had a question on whether there's a price differential on potable versus reclaimed water in the San Antonio water system. I think that's probably referring to the slide that was on Credit Human. I know there is a price differential. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yes. So reclaimed water or municipal reclaimed water, where they treated the wastewater effluent up to a type 1 quality standard, is traditionally is marketed at a subsidized rate. So the utility tries to sell it at a lower cost than drinking water to incentivize its uptake. That does not always pencil out economically for the capital required to develop that distribution and pump system to get that water out there. But the hope is that as more users adopt it, they can sell more of it to be able to fund that capital. So if we want more of it, we need to see more adoption of it, more use of it. A lot of times those systems are deployed out to public parks or golf courses. So because they're heavy users, they use a ton of water. So for them, it makes total sense. They're going to use 100,000 gallons a month. It makes sense for them to use that instead of drinking water because it's at a lower rate and they're not having to use potable water. So, but past those points, it's become challenging to extend the reclaimed line to more users. But the strategy is that it's at a subsidized rate.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. So we have a question from Carmen. She asks, is there an initiative to use as many nature-based solutions as possible to create as regenerative a system as possible rather than focusing on a technology-based system that requires more maintenance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's going to come down to the conversation with the building owner and staff about what solution is going to be right for them. Do they want something that's going to be able to hide away in the bottom story of a basement, which is going to be a higher technology-based solution, or do they want something that they want to show off and put out in the public space so people can see the nature-based solution, right? And actually see what's happening. It's going to depend on those types of factors, cost, complexity, But I would say absolutely. There's an emphasis on trying to maintain those in the system when available. There's definitely not a shutting of a door to any solution. It's really going to depend on the owner and the user.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, a really good answer. I think I'm gonna ask two more questions. Then again, folks, if I didn't get to yours in time, I apologize, but please feel free to reach out to Chandler or myself, and we'll be happy to coordinate on getting you an answer. So the second to last question I wanted to ask is we have another question here. Is it possible that the filtering standards for rainwater might be too stringent, when the standards for black water might be too weak? Like, are the standards that we have today making it difficult to uptake on-site reuse?
Well, the state does not mandate treatment standards for outdoor use of captured rainwater. There is a a history of safe practice using filtration and microfiltration and UV disinfection, even at the home scale. Um, and so I would say I would say that in that application, it's appropriate. One of the challenges with moving, I mentioned this earlier, but using rainwater for a public water supply, the TCQ does not give any credence to rainwater being of higher quality than surface water from a reservoir. So they only classify TCQ only public permits public water supply systems for groundwater and surface water. And if it's not either of those, it's going in surface water. So rainwater is required to use advanced overkill treatment standards up to the surface water requirements to be able to get permitted. And so that was actually a huge challenge with that project in Shield Ranch that I mentioned. They have like an overkill treatment system, but there's a good report that's being prepared by the Meadows Center coming out of that project where we're hoping that the TCQ will recognize variances that could then be pursued by projects down the line to exclude some of those burdensome treatment requirements while still protecting, obviously, public health.
Sure, thank you. And then the last question, and I think that means at least everybody who's asked questions got at least one of theirs answered. So we had a question from Mark. He asks, does Texas Water Trade provide a design coordinator?
Um, yes, I mean, effectively, what I've done with a few projects thus far is basically sit in on with their owner's rep and sit in on their design team and advocate for these systems across the project integration. Um, Myself as a licensed engineer, I'm not looking to work on projects and carve out work from existing teams. I just want to advocate for these projects. And so, yeah, I guess, classifying that as a design coordinator for this component of the project, not for a full development.
Wonderful, thank you. So I think just in the interests of time, I'm going to stop the Q&A there. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions. Chandler, thank you so much for being our second Water Walk presenter this year. It was a really interesting presentation. For those who are still on, thank you for sticking around. I put in the chat the link to our March Water Wonks presentation, which will be by Marisa Bruno, Opportunities in Subdivision Regulation. And then I just wanted to let everyone know that these presentations are recorded and we will have them up on our website for anyone to view later in the week. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Chandler.
Thank y'all.